And the Egyptians challenged the government, and the government was unwilling to go after them, and we saw this broader revolution that's now swept through the whole region.
Stephen Flanagan, thanks. Sorry to rush you at the end here. The House is ready to come into session. I want to bring you to the House floor now.
Great. Thank you, Greg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to honor the distinguished career of a man who's been an institution within an institution, Daniel P. Mulholland, the director of our Congressional Research Service, who will retire next month after more than 70 years at the helm of CRS and nearly 42 years of service to the Congress overall. To say that Dan is an institution around here is really an understatement. In many ways, he's personified the growth of CRS from a relatively small division of the Library of Congress into the world-class source of objective and authoritative research and analysis that it is today. Dan first joined what was then the Legislative Reference Service as an analyst in American national government in September of 1969, fresh out of his doctoral training at Georgetown. At the time, just 2 of the 435 members currently serving in this House had been elected to Congress, and as far as that's concerned, a fair number serving here hadn't even been born yet. For the next 25 years, Dan steadily acquired seniority and respect within the government division at CRS, excelling as both an analyst and a division chief. When the Librarian of Congress, Dr. James Billington, conducted a strategic review of the library's priorities in the early 90s, Dan was tapped to help ensure that the library's services were as relevant as possible to members, committees, and staff, those that exist to serve. This assignment led him to assume the role of acting Deputy Librarian of Congress, and when CRS found itself in search of a new director a few years later, Dan was a natural fit. As director, Dan has continued to exemplify both the analytical depth that is at the core of his organization's mission and the strategic vision needed to bring CRS into the 21st century. He expanded the service's ability to bring interdisciplinary scholarship to bear on complex issues of policy, recruiting scientists and engineers to work alongside policy analysts and attorneys, developed a personnel succession plan to ensure that CRS will continue to be able to recruit top-notch talent as older analysts retire.
Want to yield?
I'll be happy to yield.
Speaker, I thank my friend for yielding, and I'd like to join him in extending our hearty congratulations to Dan Mulholland for his extraordinary service to this institution, and in particular the work that he has done to ensure that the House-Democracy Partnership has been able to succeed. And I want to thank my friend for taking out this very important time, and I thank him for yielding.
I thank my friend and colleague, Mr. Dreyer, the chairman of the House Democracy Partnership, and what he says is very important. Dan Mulholland and the Congressional Research Service have been a critical partner in our effort to work with parliaments around the world in developing democracies to increase their capacity.
We should say we have 4 of them here, in fact, this week.
We have 4 parliaments in town this week from Pakistan, Indonesia, some members from Iraq, and
Lebanon.
And Lebanon, that's right. 4 parliaments this week, and the CRS, as usual, is a full partner in putting on some workshops for these members that will help them with their operations back home, and these exchanges are very useful to us as well. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to need to submit the bulk of this statement to the record. It goes into some detail about Mr. Mulholland's background at CRS. But as my colleague has stressed, the real reason for the 2 of us being here to offer this tribute today is because of the support he has offered over the years. First to the Frost-Solomon Task Force, the precursor of our efforts in the early 90s, working in Central and Eastern Europe, offering technical assistance at that point. But then for the last 6 years, the House Democracy Partnership.
I thank my friend.
So we're happy to join today in thanking Dan Mulholland for all these years of work, and particularly acknowledging the kind of support that he's offered our efforts. He knows a lot about Congress as an institution. He has a profound respect for Congress as an institution, and so he's brought a particular sense of mission, I think, to the work of these commissions that has greatly assisted us, has really helped us. He recognizes as a political scientist how critical legislative research is to the growth of democracy first in post-communist Europe, and now to all kinds of emerging democracies around the world. had the privilege of traveling with Dan to Warsaw last year to observe the 20th anniversary of that earlier task force work. And I can assure colleagues, he received a hero's welcome. His work has not gone unnoticed, and it's not going to go unnoticed by us as well. We want to salute Dan Mulholland for his many, many years of distinguished service. We want to thank him for all that he's done, and we want to wish him well in his retirement, offer him our sincere gratitude and praise.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. McCotter, for 5 minutes.
I ask permission to address the House for 5 minutes and to revise and extend my remarks.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, today I rise to honor the extraordinary life of Edgar Hagopian and to mourn his passing at the age of 80. Born on August 16, 1930, to Hartoon and Cariana Hagopian, Edgar dedicated his life to serving our community and our country. He was an exemplary citizen with an incredible work ethic who held an absolute love for his ancestral Armenia. After graduating from Detroit's Cass Tech High School in 1948, Edgar studied at the University of Michigan and valiantly served in the United States Army during the Korean War. After being honorably discharged on December 7, 1954, Technical Sergeant Hagopian joined his father's business, where he had frequently worked since childhood. Thus began a long and storied career, establishing himself not only as a successful entrepreneur, but as an ardent advocate and activist for our community and Armenian causes. Edgar served on the Board of Directors of the Armenian Assembly of America, the Board of Governors of the Michigan Design Center, the Detroit chapter of the Armenian General Benevolent Union, and the Michigan chapter of the Seeds of Peace. He was an associate in the Founders Society of the Detroit Institute of Arts and was involved with the Armenian Library. Edgar also founded the Detroit chapter of the Armenian American Business Council. Edgar was named Man of the Year by the Canadian Armenian Business Council in 1995. In 2002, he was inducted into the International Institute Heritage Hall of Fame, and Edgar was awarded the 2005 Ellis Island Medal of Honor. This prestigious award was created to honor ancestral groups who, through struggle, sacrifice, and success, helped build this great nation. Edgar Hagopian deeply loved his community, and his community loved him. Always mindful of his humble roots, Edgar always endeavored to better our world. He was a mentor to many and an avid patron of the arts. A pensive philanthropist, Edgar led Hagopian companies to donate in excess of $70 million in goods and services to local charities. Sadly, on March 27, 2011, Edgar passed from this earthly world to his eternal reward. He is survived by his beloved wife of 54 years, Sarah, and his children, Suzanne, Edmund, and Angela. Yet Edgar's legacy will continue in the lives of his grandsons, Alexander, Adam, and Nicholas. As he joins his brother Arthur in eternity, Edgar is also survived by sisters Mary and Eileen and his brother Steve. Mr. Speaker, Edgar Hagopian will be long remembered as a compassionate father, dedicated husband, passionate champion of Armenian causes, a philanthropist, a community leader, and above all, as a friend. Edgar was a man who deeply treasured his family, friends, community, and his country. Today, as we bid Edgar Hagopian farewell, I ask my colleagues to join me in mourning his passing and honoring his unwavering patriotism and legendary service to our community and our country. I would also ask us to reflect on what is perhaps the most poignant part of Edgar's legacy. We are not enriched by what we do for ourselves, but by what we do for others within the short span of time God grants. Truly, Edgar Hagopian used the time he was given to leave us all better off. And now, in honor of him, let us return the favor to our fellow human beings. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Illinois, Ms. Schakowsky, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to address a grave threat to both our economy and our democracy, and that is the disappearing middle class. Over the last 30 years, there has been a dramatic and deliberate transfer of wealth from middle class to the very, very, very rich. Income inequality is now at the highest level since 1928. Wages have stagnated for middle and working class families despite enormous gains in productivity. Where has the money gone? This chart shows the change in the average pre-tax household income from 1979 to 2005. The bottom 20%, that's that number way down in the corner, the bottom 20% of households saw their income over those 30 years grow just $200. Over the same period, the top 0.1% saw income growth of nearly $6 million each year. The top 1/100th of 1% now makes an average of $27 million per household per year. The average income for the bottom 90% of Americans, $31,244. Meanwhile, Republicans who squandered a budget surplus created a huge deficit with unpaid-for tax cuts that went mainly to the very rich, and whose policies allowed Wall Street recklessness to bring our economy to near collapse, are now demanding that the middle class foot the bill. Their solution to our fiscal mess is to gut vital programs like Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, and to make cuts in domestic spending that would cause an additional 700,000 middle-class Americans to lose their jobs. In the next chart, you can see some of the enormous cuts that they are proposing. $1.3 billion from community health centers, the only source of medical care for many families. $5.7 billion from Pell Grants, reducing the size of the grant for 9.4 million students who want to go to college. And $1 billion in funding for high-speed rail, important infrastructure projects that will create good jobs, thousands and thousands of good jobs. Once again, they're showing their utter disregard for the shrinking middle class and those who aspire to it by cutting important jobs programs and assistance programs for poor families. Part 2 of the Republican program for addressing our economic problem and every other problem is to cut taxes even more for the rich. Enough is enough. It's time for millionaires and billionaires to pay their fair share. This isn't about punishment and it isn't about revenge. It is about fairness. Currently, the top tax bracket starts at $375,000, failing to distinguish between the well-off and billionaires. I have introduced the Fairness in Taxation Act, which would create new tax brackets beginning at 45% for income over $1 million, rising to 49% for income of $1 billion a year or more. And yes, there are people in our country who made $1 billion or more just last year. Historically, these rates are relatively modest. During most of the Reagan administration, the top tax rate was 50%, and in previous decades, the top tax rate was as high as 94%. My bill would also address a fundamental inequality in our current law by taxing capital gains and dividends at ordinary income rates in those brackets. Rich hedge fund managers should not be paying a lower tax rate than their secretaries, because much of their income, the hedge fund managers, is capital gains and dividends. According to Citizens for Tax Justice, the Fairness in Taxation Act will raise more than $78.9 billion if enacted in 2011, allowing us to avoid the harsh cuts that will hurt the middle class. This is an idea that Americans support. In a recent poll, 81% of respondents supported placing a surtax on federal income for those who make more than $1 million per year in order to reduce the deficit. Passing the Fairness in Taxation Act will allow us to stop the war on the middle class, restore fiscal integrity and fairness, and fund initiatives that reflect our American values and goals. Thank you. I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Rosley-Tinnen, for 5 minutes. Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker, and I rise today to congratulate a constituent of my South Florida community, Gus Machado of Gus Machado Ford, for receiving the Ford Motor Company's President's Award. The President's Award is a prestigious honor and is awarded to less than 10% of all dealers nationwide. It recognizes Gus Machado Ford for exceeding customer expectations in every department. Customer satisfaction is more important than ever during these tough economic times, and its loyal and supportive customer base has allowed Machado Ford to prosper where others have seen their market shrink. Certainly in the past year and a half, we have sadly witnessed many dealers close up shop. It has been a very difficult period for car dealers nationwide, but Gus has not only survived, but flourished. I applaud Gus Machado Ford for making the interests of customers its #1 priority. And to further recognize his contribution to our South Florida neighborhoods, two outstanding individuals, Remedios and Fausto Diaz Oliver, will acknowledge the significant aid that Gus has provided to others with a community event this Sunday. Gus may be best known for his outstanding company, but his hand in helping those less fortunate in our South Florida area is admirable. In 1985, Gus organized the first golf shootout at the Doral Golf Resort. With all proceeds going to the American Cancer Society, the charity event was so successful that his shootout has become an annual event. Along with his golf event, Gus is also founder of 2 additional charity events. He is founder of the first PGA Tour Senior Golf Classic at Miami and Key Biscayne, which donates to the American Cancer Society and to the United Way. He's also founder of the Gus Machado Classic Charity Golf Tournament, which has raised over $500,000 for cancer research. In 2008, to better serve the community through his charitable contributions, he created the Gus Machado Family Foundation. Every year, the foundation celebrates the Gus Machado Community and Back to School Fair on the grounds of his car dealership. The event provides hundreds of children with backpacks full of school supplies, along with the generous donations of school materials that the foundation supplies to our children. It also offers immunizations and ID cards for kids in conjunction with different state and local government agencies during the Back to School Community Fair. As a contributor to over 30 charitable organizations, few in our community have impacted South Florida as much as Gus has. Again, congratulations to Gus Machado for his recent commendation and for his leadership to our community. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to honor Irving Higgs on his well-deserved retirement after 46 years of public service in the Florida Keys. Irving's long and distinguished career was marked by a solid 35 years as property appraiser of Monroe County, otherwise known as the Keys. In his service to the Keys, Irving has borne witness to the unique and profound changes that have taken place in our Keys community. His commitment to excellence has truly allowed him to shape the lives of countless conks. It is sad to see such a fine and dedicated public servant retiring, but those who follow in his footsteps will truly have much to establish. There are few greater rewards than the satisfaction of serving one's community, and I thank Irvin for so much for having embraced this most noble of endeavors with such high principles. Congratulations to Irvin on his retirement, and I wish him all the best on this new chapter of his life. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the time.
From Ohio, Ms. Capter for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, a little over a week ago, the executive branch launched U.S. military force against yet another Middle Eastern country. This time, it is oil-rich Libya. U.S. naval and air forces attacked Libyan military installations across that country, wiping out air defenses, intelligence systems, tanks, and also apparently is now targeting that nation's ground forces. Under what policy is the executive branch operating without a vote of Congress and expending millions of defense dollars and state dollars on offensive action taken inside a nation that did nothing provocative toward the United States and in fact last year was even a recipient of U.S. foreign aid. The President's justification for this action was it was not an act of war, but rather a humanitarian mission to prevent a catastrophe that would have resulted from Libya's military forces under the command of Libyan President Muammar Gaddafi from taking the civilian center of Benghazi. Our President says he did not act alone, as French, British, Canadian, and other Western NATO members participated in these attacks. The President informed Congress that future operations will be handled by NATO. Well, who exactly decided all of this? Not Congress. If this is not an act of war, as F-16s fly over and bomb and U.S. naval forces shell, what is it? The President has further said he authorized this military action to enforce UN Security Resolution 1973, and on that resolution, many nations who normally are U.S. allies abstained from the vote, such as India and Brazil and Germany. The President said he sought the permission of the Arab League before taking action, but it was 3 days into the bombing when the press reported the Arab League said it had no objection to the bombing. So where in these operations have been the Arab League's planes and soldiers? And I might ask, where is the African Union's engagement? Why are they silent? It appears the administration consulted key allies from oil-dependent Europe, like the French who dropped the first bombs, and the British. But the President didn't bother to ask Congress. We live in very strange and dangerous times. The administration says it made a couple of phone calls to members of Congress serving in the leadership. Well, who exactly were they? And then the administration set up an after-the-fact briefing for members of Congress in the Capitol Visitor Center. None of these gestures meet the spirit or letter of the law under our Constitution relating to military engagement abroad. Yes, protest movements seem to be springing up across Africa and the Middle East, and we witness some Libyan rebels, though we really don't know exactly who they are or who's funding them, take to the streets to demand reform and an end to the Gaddafi government's grip on power. But we also see troops very loyal to the Gaddafi regime who are fighting to maintain that regime. So why is America taking a military role in an internal civil conflict without a vote of Congress on behalf of the American people whose sons and daughters are engaged in these operations? Should we not be clear on whom it is we are supporting, for how long, and through what legal means? I and the entire world watched with horror the news reports of Gaddafi's troops attacking civilians, including shutting off food, water, and fuel, shelling cities and towns, and targeting innocent people for killing. Those responsible for these crimes must face justice for what they have done. But please tell me, where across that region do we not have dictators in charge of nations? Is America to intervene everywhere there is an uprising? Libya is certainly not the only African country facing a humanitarian crisis. We have all but ignored the situation in Côte d'Ivoire, which has already displaced approximately 500,000 people, with triple the population of Libya. The crisis in Côte d'Ivoire would dwarf the violence in Libya. Would the President's logic extend there? Or what about the Congo or Sudan? Is it America's new 21st century Monroe Doctrine to now intervene militarily under the guise of humanitarian aid wherever a president chooses? The crisis in Libya was several weeks old when the President chose to take action. Surely there was time to seek congressional approval. I'm highly concerned that this military intervention took the familiar pattern of launching attacks just when Congress left town to go back to our districts for a week, thus silencing our voices in Congress even more as this floor was shut down. How premeditated and how irresponsible I believe the current course of events to be. I have sent an official letter to the Obama administration asking under what U.S. legal authority U.S. forces have been engaging in Libya. As a member of the Defense Subcommittee, I fully expect a matter of this nature would have been brought up before us. It never was. What have the operations cost to date, and from which accounts are funds being taken? The Department of Defense claims it can't create a civil works employment program to employ our returning U.S., Iraqi, and Afghani veterans when they come home here, yet it finds money for this excursion. Mr. Speaker, there should have been a vote on the use of force outside our borders, not a notice after the fact. Anyone who is following the news has seen the reports of protest and unrest in multiple nations.
The gentlelady's time has expired.
Mr. Speaker, on the operations in Libya, there should have been a vote here.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Jones, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. A couple of weeks ago, we had the opportunity to vote and bring our troops home from Afghanistan. It was Mr. Kucinich's amendment resolution, that many of us hoped that my party would have joined. We only had 8 Republicans to vote to bring our troops home this year from Afghanistan. Mr. Speaker, what is so ironic, we sit on this floor and we debate cutting the budget, doing this and that, and yet we're supporting a corrupt leader named Karzai in Afghanistan. In fact, I want to share with the people that a former Marine general is my confidential advisor. I don't have permission to use his name, but I could, I guess, but I don't have his permission. This is what he said in a recent email to me. What do we say to the mother, the father, the wife of the last soldier or Marine killed to support a corrupt leader and a corrupt government in a war that cannot be won? Let me share with you, Mr. Speaker, a couple comments from the leader of Afghanistan, President Karzai. On March 12, 2011, in the New York Times, he said, "I request that NATO and America should stop these operations on our soil." He said, this was not on our soil, these wars, because there is no terrorism here on our soil. He further stated on December the 8th of 2010, in a meeting with Petraeus and Eckenberry, Karzai stated that he now has 3 main enemies: the Taliban, the United States, and the international community. He said, if I had to choose sides today, I'd choose the Taliban. This is the leader of a country where our young men and women are going and getting killed and losing their legs and their arms. It makes no sense, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, according to a Washington Post ABC News poll on March 15th of this year, obviously, 73% of Americans no longer think the war in Afghanistan is worth fighting. 73% of the American people say the war in Afghanistan is not worth fighting. I was very disappointed when Secretary Gates spoke to the Armed Services Committee, which I serve on recently, and I'd like to read his quote, because we're going to be there until about 2014 or 2015 unless this Congress demands that we start bringing our troops home. This is his quote, Mr. Speaker. "That is why we believe that beginning in fiscal year 2015, the U.S. can, with minimal risk, begin reducing Army active duty in strength by 27,000 and the Marine Corps by somewhere between 15 and 20,000. These projections assume that the number of troops in Afghanistan would be significantly reduced by the end of 2014 in accordance with the President's strategy." Mr. Speaker, we're going to be there to 2014 or maybe even 2015. I also would like to show this poster that it was in the Greensboro paper. It's called the News and the Record on the 27th of 2011. There's a flag-draped coffin coming off of a plane, Mr. Speaker, and the paper in Mr. Howard Coble's district said, "Get out. Get out of Afghanistan before it's too late," and it's a black hole with no end to it. In closing, Mr. Speaker, I would like to read from a letter from a Marine down in my district, Camp Lejeune, Jacksonville, North Carolina. He served 31 years, retired as a colonel in the United States Marine Corps. "I urge you to make contact with the current and newly elected men and women to Congress and ask them to end this war and bring our young men and women home. If any of my comments will assist you in this effort, you are welcome to use them in my name. Dennis G. Adams, Lieutenant Colonel, retired United States Marine Corps." Mr. Speaker, before I close, yesterday with Congresswoman Sue Myrick, I went to Walter Reed Hospital to visit the young soldiers and Marines who have lost their legs, their arms, and 2 of them that we saw, Mr. Speaker, have no body parts below their waist, no body parts below our waist. And here we are supporting a corrupt leader of a nation that, quite frankly, will never be a nation. It is a country. It's not a nation. It never will have a national government. Why are we wasting $7 billion a month in Afghanistan and our young men and women are coming back with broken bodies? Mr. Speaker, it is time to get out of Afghanistan. I close by asking God to please bless our men and women in uniform. I ask God to please bless the families of our men and women in uniform. I ask God in His loving arms to hold the families who've given a child dying for freedom in Afghanistan and Iraq. I ask God to bless the House and Senate that we will do what is right in the eyes of God. And I will ask God to please bless the President that he will do what is right in the eyes of God. And I will say 3 times, God please, God please, God please continue to bless America, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Woolsey, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to express my deep concern about the military campaign in Libya, one that has been underway the last week and a half. First off, it's distressing to once again see that Congress's power has been so casually disregarded in our role and responsibility regarding war. There should have been a robust debate in this chamber about the proper course of action in Libya. The American people deserve it. The Constitution mandates it. The President gave a fine speech Monday night, as he certainly does, but I found him more eloquent than persuasive. I'm not satisfied that he has made a thorough case for military action against Libya. There are still too many unanswered questions. What is our responsibility now? Where does our commitment end? Does the Pottery Barn rule apply in Libya? If we break it, do we own it? I'm not comforted by the fact that NATO is now in charge of this mission, because the fact is the United States is the dominant force within NATO. Any NATO-led operation is one in which we still bear an enormous responsibility. And then there's the cost. The Pentagon has acknowledged that it's already spent $550 million on the Libya operation. That's after 1.5 weeks, Mr. Speaker. The bill to the taxpayer could easily climb over $1 billion. And, Mr. Speaker, at a time when we're already spending close to $7 billion a month on a failed military occupation in Afghanistan, this at a time when my friends in the majority want to snap the purse shut on so many important programs the American people need. There is unquestionably a humanitarian crisis in Libya. I'm appalled, as we all are, about Gaddafi's brutality against his own people. But I fear that this operation will set a dangerous precedent and send us sliding down a slippery slope. We can't afford to head down a path of perpetual U.S. military engagement around the world, with developing situations in Syria, the Ivory Coast, Congo, Yemen, etc., etc., etc. We can't give up on diplomatic and humanitarian efforts in favor of guns and bombs everywhere there is violence and unrest. We're already fighting 2 wars in the Middle East. Is that not enough? Have we learned nothing over the last decade? Have we learned nothing about the danger of open-ended military conflicts where the exit strategy is unclear and victory is ill-defined? The war in Afghanistan is sapping America of its strength in so many ways. It has cost us in precious taxpayer dollars, and it has cost us more than 1,500 of our bravest people. And it is costing us credibility and moral authority in ways that can't even be measured yet or quantified every single day. The time is now, Mr. Speaker, for less war, not more. Let's stop. Let's turn and let's insist that we don't turn Libya into another black hole. Let's bring our troops home from Afghanistan, and let's give our children a future of peace. I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Walberg, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to talk about a topic that affects every American: rising energy prices. I've spoken on this floor about it before, and I will continue to do so until we increase our energy production here in America and our dependence on the political earthquake zones of this world are depleted. While President Obama was traveling in South America, I returned home to my district last week, and I heard from my constituents loud and clear: gas prices are too high. We need to do something about it. That's why I found it so outrageous and appalling when I heard our President last week offering assistance and encouraging energy production not here in America, but in Brazil. No, that's not the right direction. We need to encourage energy production right here at home, not Brazil. We need to develop our offshore energy resources so that jobs can be created here in America, not Brazil. And we need to encourage energy independence so that we return to more reasonable energy costs, not in Brazil, but right here in America. Mr. Speaker, the time is now to confront this issue and encourage energy exploration and production right here at home. The time is now to create our independence from foreign energy sources and secure our present and future as good stewards of our God-given resources and the blessings of liberty. And I yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Hawaii, Ms. Hirono, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, today a united Hawaii delegation will be introducing the Native Hawaiian Government Reorganization Act in both chambers of Congress. Long denied the recognition and rights accorded to America's other indigenous people, this bill will finally enable Native Hawaiians to embark on their long-awaited process of achieving self-determination. On the House side, Congresswoman Hanabusa and I have the great pleasure of being joined in this effort by Congressman Don Young, Congressman Eni Faleomavaega, Congresswoman Madeline Bordello, and Congressman Tom Cole. All are long-standing friends of Hawaii and Native Hawaiians. How we treat our Native indigenous people reflects our values and who we are as a country. Clearly, there is much in the history of our interactions with the Native people of what is now the United States that makes us less than proud. The American Indians, Alaska Natives, and Native Hawaiians, all indigenous people, have suffered at the hands of our government. But one of the great attributes of America has always been the ability to look objectively at our history, learn from it, and when possible, make amends. The bill we are introducing today has been more than 10 years in the making. It has been a deliberative and open legislative process. There have been 12 congressional hearings on Native Hawaiian recognition, 5 of which were held in Hawaii. These bills have been marked up by committees in both chambers. The House has passed Native Hawaiian recognition bills 3 times, first in 2000, again in 2007, and most recently just last year. The goals and purposes of the Native Hawaiian Government Reorganization Act are consistent with the history of the Native Hawaiian people and the record of United States involvement in Hawaii. The bill is also consistent with over 188 existing federal laws that promote the welfare of Native Hawaiian people. I know there are members who question these authorized programs simply because Native Hawaiian is in the title, which is exactly why we need this bill. It will formalize the very special political and legal relationship between the United States and the Native Hawaiians by providing a process through which the Native Hawaiian community can reorganize its governing entity within this relationship. This is how we treat Alaska Natives and American Indians, and this is how we should treat Native Hawaiians. The Kingdom of Hawaii was overthrown in 1893. Hawaii's last monarch, Queen Liliuokalani, was deposed by an armed group of businessmen and sugar planters who were American by birth or heritage, with the support abetted by U.S. troops. The Queen agreed to relinquish her throne under protest to avoid bloodshed. She believed the United States, with which Hawaii had diplomatic relations, would restore her to the throne. There may be new members to this body who have not had occasion to learn the history of Hawaii, and I extend an open invitation to those members to share this history with you. The State of Hawaii motto, which was also the motto of the Kingdom of Hawaii, is Ua mau ke'ea, o ka'aina I kapono. Translates to, the life of the land is perpetuated in righteousness. Native Hawaiians, like American Indians and Alaska Natives, have an inherent sovereignty based on their status as indigenous Aboriginal people. I ask for your support of the Native Hawaiian Reorganization Act. Mahalo nui loa. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Barton, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Gentleman is recognized. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, my dear sweet sister-in-law, my dear sweet sister-in-law, Geraldine Beaver, went to be with her Lord on Saturday, March the 26th, 2011. She passed away at her home near Lockhart, Texas, following a long and valiant battle with cancer. She's the first of 4 daughters of James Brasher and Betty Hodges. She was born on December the 19th, 1955 in Pasadena, Texas. In addition to her parents, she is survived by her loving husband of 7 years, Jeff Beaver, 3 sons, Michael, Dustin, and Leighton Warmack, Leighton's wife, Holly, 2 granddaughters, Kelsey Ann Warmack and Maddie Ruiz, 1 grandson, Leighton Warmack, 3 sisters, Vicki Perdue, Barbara Payne, and my wife, Terry Barton. She is also survived by numerous aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews, cousins, her stepfather, Stephen Hodges, 2 brothers-in-law, 2 stepdaughters, and of course her husband's family. She began her business career in Houston, Texas as a bookkeeper for Bryan Ad Company, a multinational workover and completion fluids company that was owned by her late stepfather, James Jackson. While with Bryan Ad Company, she gained an early knowledge of computerized accounting systems when she worked closely with the programmer to convert a handwritten system into a computerized one. She moved to Lockhart, Texas, in Congressman Lloyd Doggett's district in Caldwell County in 1988. She worked several years as a secretary and bookkeeper at a local law office. She subsequently returned to the accounting field, first working with Lifeway, then Columbia Healthcare, and finally went to work for Austin's municipal transit system, Capital Metro System. She retired from Cap Metro when she came down with cancer as the payroll manager for the entire system. Carol was a very loving, caring woman. She had a ready smile, a twinkle in her eye. She treasured her husband, her family, and many, many friends. When I first started dating her baby sister, Terry, she was, as she should be, very skeptical of who she called Congressman Joe. She wasn't sure that her baby sister should be associated with anybody that was a member of Congress. I would have to say, though, that when I invited Carol and her mother and her 2 sisters and Terry to the local Dairy Queen in Lockhart, Texas, I was able to at least neutralize their opposition with some ice cream sundaes and some Barton Backer T-shirts. Carol and I became fast friends, and she came to respect not only me but this institution. She is going to be missed. She was the absolute most courageous, dedicated human being in fighting her long battle with cancer. She never complained. She never grumbled or whined about, "Why me, Lord?" She took her battle with cancer in stride. She is now with her Lord in a better place. We will miss her very, very much, but we know that one day we will see her again. Her funeral will be tomorrow in Lockhart, Texas at 1 o'clock. Visitation is this evening from 5 to 8 p.m. at the McCurdy Funeral Home in Lockhart, Texas. Sweet, sweet Carol, we miss you very much.
Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Maloney, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to remember the late Geraldine Ferraro. There will be services held for her tomorrow in New York, which many of us will be attending. It was the night of July 19th, 1984, in San Francisco, that Geraldine Ferraro changed the game, changed the rules, and changed history when she accepted the Democratic Party's nomination as Vice President of the United States of America. I was there on the floor that night as a young delegate, and when Geraldine Ferraro walked out on that stage, it was electrifying and inspiring beyond words. What her nomination meant to me and to millions of women everywhere, what she accomplished in that moment, and what she said that night was all so important that her words still ring in my ear as if it were yesterday. She said, by choosing a woman to run for our nation's second highest office, you send a powerful signal to all Americans. There are no doors we cannot unlock. We will place no limits on achievement. If we can do this, we can do anything. That moment served as a hammer blow to the glass ceiling and a clarion call for a greater gender equality in our country. I remember reading Time magazine, and Time magazine heralded her selection as a historic choice. But even more than that, it was a life-changing event. It changed the course of women's lives for the better. I know beyond question that it changed mine. Because even in that not-too-distant era, it had been all too commonplace for those in power to believe that she simply cannot do that. She's a woman. It didn't matter if you had the talents, the education, the abilities, and the drive to be the best one to get the job done, if it was a job that many believed women simply could not do it. That was the kind of thinking that was all too often applied to roles in politics, to career choices, and to sports. And Geraldine Ferraro changed all of that. When she gained admission to Fordham Law School, an admission officer said to her, "You're taking a man's place, you know. You really should not go to law school." Geraldine Ferraro knew a woman's place was in the House, the Senate, or any job she wanted to take. When she first ran for Congress in 1978, all the political experts said she could not win in her home district in Queens. She not only won, she went on to become a leader here in Congress, and she went on to become a friend, a mentor, and a role model. And that is one of the reasons that to honor her, I have redoubled my efforts to pass the Equal Rights Amendment and to add to our Constitution the simple words, "Equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States on or by any state on account of sex." Those words embody the principles that Geraldine Ferraro lived by and the equality of opportunity that she sought. I saw her several weeks ago. She was full of energy and plans and had some constituent issues she wanted me to take care of. She never gave up. She never gave in. Towards the end, Geraldine Ferraro fought her own battle against cancer with the same dignity, courage, tenacity, and grace that she brought to all of her fights. Whether it was battling for equal rights or for human rights for women and men alike. It can truly be said of Geraldine Ferraro, this heroine and role model for the ages, what was once said of the great heroes of old. She was, as Tennyson wrote, and I quote, "one equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak by time and fate, but strong in will, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield." Geraldine Ferraro, we shall never forget her, and I remember one of her great sayings was, "Every time a woman runs, women win." Thank you.
Gentlelady yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Pence, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Abortion on demand is an American tragedy, but public funding for abortion and abortion providers is an American disgrace. Fortunately, we've never been closer to denying public funding to abortion providers in America than we are today. On February 18, 2011, with bipartisan support, the House of Representatives passed H.R. 1, which included the Pence Amendment,
ending taxpayer funding for Planned Parenthood, the largest abortion provider in America. Despite efforts to suggest otherwise, the Pence Amendment does not reduce funding for cancer screening or eliminate one dime of funding for other important health services to women. If the Pence Amendment becomes law, thousands of women's health centers, clinics, and hospitals would still provide assistance to low-income families and women. The Pence Amendment would simply deny all federal funding to Planned Parenthood of America. Over the past several weeks, Planned Parenthood has used its vast resources to launch slick Madison Avenue television ads portraying the nation's largest abortion provider as an altruistic organization that provides health care services to the poor with only an incidental interest in the abortion industry. The truth is far afield from the image. The truth is that a major source of Planned Parenthood's clinic income comes from the abortion business. Despite attempts by advocates for the abortion industry and ideologues on the left to portray efforts to defund Planned Parenthood as some kind of a war on women, the issue here is big business, and that business is abortion. This legislative battle over the Pence Amendment is about big abortion versus American taxpayers and American women specifically. As Abby Johnson, a former Planned Parenthood director, recently said, quote, "Planned Parenthood's mission on paper is to give quality and affordable health care and to protect women's rights. But in reality," she said, "their mission is to increase their abortion numbers and to turn their increase into revenue." Close quote. There is no doubt that Planned Parenthood's focus is on making big abortion even bigger. In 2009, the group made only 977 adoption referrals, cared for 7,021 prenatal clients, but they performed an unprecedented 332,278 abortions. In fact, in 2009, a pregnant woman entering a Planned Parenthood clinic was 42 times more likely to have an abortion than to receive either prenatal care or be referred to an adoption service. And according to their most recent annual report, the organization raked in $1.1 billion in total revenue. Of that amount, $363.2 million came from taxpayers in the form of government grants and contracts. This is about big business, and that business is abortion. And for all the talk about how poor women would be harmed if taxpayers stop subsidizing big abortion, it's telling to see how they've been spending their money. According to a June 2008 story in the Wall Street Journal, Planned Parenthood was flush with cash and using its profits to rebrand itself to appeal to more affluent American women. Their rebranding effort was designed to build their business by increasingly targeting wealthy consumers to complement their existing targeting of poor and minority women. While taxpayers underwrite their operations, Planned Parenthood is building large luxury health centers in shopping centers and malls designed by marketing experts with touches like hardwood floors, muted lighting, large waiting rooms, and the like. And big abortion routinely puts profits over women's health and safety. When women testify on behalf of improved safety standards at abortion clinics, Planned Parenthood opposes them and fights them every step of the way. And despite the fact that 88% of Americans favor informed consent laws that provide information about the risks and alternatives to abortion for women, Planned Parenthood opposes these efforts and works to keep women in the dark in jurisdictions across the country. The reality is abortion on demand is an American tragedy, but public funding of abortion providers is an American disgrace. The time has come to deny any and all funding to Planned Parenthood of America. And this week, as House Republicans reaffirm our commitment to H.R. 1, reaffirm our commitment to make a down payment on fiscal responsibility and reform, let us also seize this moment to reaffirm our commitment to defend the broad, mainstream values of the American people in the way we spend the people's money. I urge continued support by my colleagues on both sides of the aisle of the Pence Amendment, denying public funding to Planned Parenthood of America.
Gentleman's time has expired. Now is the gentleman from California, Mr. Lewis, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I very much appreciate my colleague yielding me this time. I've come to the floor to let the world know that during the time I've been in the Congress. From my view, one of my dearest friends has just passed away. Geraldine Ferraro and I came to the Congress together as classmates some 3 decades ago. She was more than just a friend. She managed to have me serve on the same committee with her that first term. From the Public Works Committee, it wasn't very long before she convinced a cross-section of us to travel with her to New York to attempt to have us better understand the difficulty New York has in delivering potable water to the people of the great city of New York. Geraldine was a really, really tough lady, according to some. I knew her as a wonderful friend. She was a woman who cared about her constituency, fought very hard to represent their interests. And indeed, the initial role of any member of Congress is to represent or try to represent their people well. And Jerry and I learned together what that was all about. So over these years, as I look back on this service, the opportunity to serve with the woman who became the first major party woman as a vice presidential nominee, it was always my privilege to say that Jerry Ferraro, most importantly, was my friend. So with that, in memory of Jerry's service here in the Congress, I watched her grow as a human being and a public servant, and I'm very proud of the fact that she is my friend. Yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the Chair declares the House in recess until noon today.
And the House returns at noon Eastern for work on a bill reauthorizing a D.C. school voucher and scholarship program. Live coverage, of course, when the House gavels back in here on C-SPAN. Off the floor.